Hello and welcome to Socrates TV. In this video I am looking at transport in the United Kingdom and the policy changes that I think need to be made. Although we have a Secretary of State for Transport, there does not seem to be any logical or joined up thinking. We'll start by looking at roads. We have a policy in the UK pushing us towards electric powered vehicles on the roads to reduce carbon emissions. This requires increased mining of rare metals to make the batteries required. We also have had a shortage of computer chips, which are now essential to operate the modern motor vehicle. Existing petrol and diesel fuel prices have increased dramatically due to various factors, but this time around there have not been any riots at the petrol stations. At the same time, the Chancellor in April 2022 reduced fuel duty by 5p per litre, which I believe was a mistake. This has had minimal effect and has already been swallowed up. In mid-April, RAC Fuel Watch reported that the average price of petrol was 162.19p per litre and diesel 176.18p per litre. The government has declared that its aim is to favour energy efficient transport. This is a marvellous aim, but the government show no signs of doing anything to achieve it. In fact, quite the opposite. With fuel duty having been held down for many years with no increases, encouragement of more and more vehicles onto the roads, Private Eye recently reported that the cost of running a car has fallen by 15% over the past 10 years. The cost of train fares has risen by 20% and the cost of bus fares by 40%. This is completely counterproductive. The object should be to encourage people onto mass transit systems and off use of cars. But people will only do this if the mass transit systems are in place, frequent and cheaper than car usage. Before we leave motor cars, I would just like to comment on smart motorways. These are becoming the most dangerous roads on which to drive because the hard shoulders are being converted to main carriageways. Studies have shown that even on ordinary motorways, cars that have to stop on a hard shoulder are more at risk of being rear-ended by other vehicles, including heavy goods vehicles, partly because of the psychological effect of other drivers looking at the stopped vehicle and subconsciously being drawn towards it. This is why paragraphs 275 and 277 of the Highway Code give advice that you should keep well away from your vehicle. In other words, get over the fence and climb up the embankment as soon as possible if there is one. On a smart motorway, you do not have this option. Yes, there may be the occasional safe refuge, but what are the chances of your car breaking down just by the side of one? BBC Panorama in January 2022 showed that near misses have risen 20-fold since the removal of the hard shoulder. National Highways reported that there have been 63 fatalities between 2015 and 2019 on smart motorways. This figure is disputed given that the declared fatality rate on smart motorways is 1/3 higher than on standard motorways. In my opinion, all motorways should have a hard shoulder that is not available for use as a main carriageway. I'll now move on to buses. Free passes for over 65s has been an excellent idea, but bus companies are reporting that they are cutting back routes due to a lack of passengers. Recently this has been compounded by COVID, but even in normal times the lack of persuasion to stop using cars has meant that routes have been cut back or reduced to minimal services. This becomes a vicious circle, as it can then be argued that there are not enough passengers to justify the route at all. In towns and cities, it may appear that there are enough buses, but this can be deceptive if you wish to cross a town without going through the centre. In the country, in some areas, there may only be 1 or 2 buses per day. The government should introduce measures to restrict car usage and match that with subsidy so that bus companies can build routes and frequency to match the crossover. Then come on to trains. The other transport system that is an absolute mess is the railways. I love travelling by train, but it has been a mess since the days of Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister, who apparently hated trains and would not use them for travel. In March 2022, fares increased by 3.8% at a time when travel is only just starting to recover from COVID, and further making train travel much more expensive than car travel. The government has completely lost the plot. To gain more passengers, you reduce fares, not put them up. SNCF trains in France are state subsidised and are one of the cheapest methods of transport. Technically, state subsidy is not permitted in the EU, but well, the French are the French. But the UK is no longer in the EU, so we could, with the right minister, have a sensible, coordinated and integrated transport system. Before COVID, in 2018, I could travel to London off-peak return, about 3 hours each way, for around £45 to £50. It is now £81.95 in 2022. This is not the way to encourage more users. There are numerous other problems with rail. Freight should move to rail, but road is encouraged instead, with even double traction units being thought about, and maybe even more, moving towards the Australian system of train trucks. The structure of rail is fragmented, with different managements not talking to each other and multiple private contractors with no oversight. The object of the exercise seems to be to make as much profit for private investors as possible, instead of profits being ploughed back into upgrading infrastructure. Instead, infrastructure is being funded by government borrowing, compounded by massive overruns on cost. A famous satire sketch by John Bird and John Fortune in a Bremner, Bird and Fortune TV show completely shredded rail operation in UK several years ago, concluding that the only people who benefit from the whole rotten system are banks and the top management. Since that sketch, there has not been a better analysis of how the cash is siphoned out of the system instead of improving it. We have National Rail, soon to be Great British Rail, responsible for infrastructure, but fragmented and ineffective. Then, the operating companies, who are not allowed to own their own rolling stock, but have to lease it, so resulting in out-of-date stock continuing to be used long after its use-by date. The leasing companies buy the trains by borrowing from banks, who make the profits, instead of the train system making profits that are fed back in to improve infrastructure. The system was rubbish then, and it is rubbish now. One example in my own experience is the new hybrid diesel and electric trains built by Hitachi for Great Western Railway. The 125 trains that they replaced had reasonably comfortable seats. The first class seats were especially good, and they need to be, as a long distance journey on GWR can last 6 hours. The seats on Hitachi coaches are hard, unyielding and painful to sit on for any journey over 1 hour. The people at GWR who specified these obviously had not tried sitting on them from Penzance to London, and that is the first class seats. I wrote to Hitachi about this, but did not receive the courtesy of a reply. Also, we have the present situation where the government has run out of money. Yes, I know COVID got in the way, but improving infrastructure creates jobs, improves the service, and at the right price per seat makes more profit. But that profit should flow back into the system, not into private dividends. Instead, plans to electrify most routes have been cut back. Plans to construct or electrify in the north of England have been cancelled. Trains from Paddington to Penzance run on electric as far as Newbury. The train then stops. The electric system is switched off and the diesel started. Absolute nonsense, and the locomotives had to be specially made. The way that franchising train operation works is that the government awards contracts to the lowest bidder. The operator then extracts as much cash as possible, then argues that the deal is uneconomic, so asks for government funds. At some point, the operator just gives up, or the government cancels the deal and runs the service in-house. Instead of realising the obvious, the government then tries to offer the franchise out again. The issue seems quite easy to understand. Roads can carry private motorists, buses and freight and are relatively unrestricted. Railways run on railway lines, so have to be very specifically journey managed, but do have the advantage of being able to carry lots of people and freight. So what we really need is an integrated system where people are positively discouraged from using cars and positively encouraged to use bus and rail by having low fares, based on the famous line attributed to Jack Cohen, the founder of Tesco in the earlier 20th century, "Stack them high, sell them cheap." That will mean subsidy to begin with. Then invest in infrastructure and electrify all rail. Also, for heaven's sake, plan linkages properly. The new Crossrail has the wrong platform heights, so cannot link to the Channel Tunnel. Increase bus routes and timetables so that it does not take 3 to 4 times as long to go anywhere by bus than it does by car. Encourage industry to move freight from ports and between main distribution centres by rail, so that distribution trucks are only used for shorter local journeys. Railways should be a public service, as should others such as water and power, but history means that we have to try something different. British Rail, as a nationalised industry, was much too top-heavy and inefficient. Privatised, it is a mess and still loses money. It lends itself to being a not-for-profit business, and possibly the basis for it should be a trust. It would also need an independent system for setting pay at all levels, so that it does not end up as a management money-making machine like education academies. All we need is a transport minister and a chancellor with vision and an integrated plan. Is that asking too much? Thank you for watching this video from Socrates TV. Please subscribe and make your comments. Bye for now.